I tried to present this in a way that would speak to the members such that they could make a very clear and limited decision if they wanted to.
Many laws about not doing this to human beings. Human beings should not be processed like meat.
And the same with Dr. Trozy, the same thing. I mean, it is his duty to raise questions about COVID-19. They're trying to prosecute him for doing that. I'm saying he has been a university professor. His job is to raise questions, but not in Dr. Whitmore's Ontario.
For Rebel News here at the Toronto headquarters, I'm Tamara Ugolini reporting with Dr. Trozy, who is one of the earliest COVID dissident doctors. He was whistleblowing the fact that hospitals remained empty despite the narrative at the beginning of the COVID pandemic pandemonium that they were being overrun and overwhelmed, and it contradicted all of the justification used for further COVID-related restrictions and measures like mask mandates and further lockdowns. I'm joined here as well in studio with Michael Alexander, who's counsel for Dr. Trozy, and also Dr. Luchku and Dr. Phillips, who were recently in front of the CPSO, that's the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, to put forth a motion basically to squash further investigation and any disciplinary action that these physicians are facing for various things like upholding their private patient medical records, the allegation that they have written mask exemptions and or vaccine exemptions, along with various other things like being, general COVID skeptics. So I guess that's my kind of first question, is to lead into with yourself, Michael Alexander, is what was the basis of the motion here put forward? I heard lots of arguments during the live tweeting session that I did throughout the hearing, constitutionality. But the main point here that I took away was that the fact that these are recommendations and guidelines, not legislated laws or regulations, and so therefore they have no legal merit or basis for further action. Can you elaborate a little bit on your arguments there?
Yeah, well, for the last year and a half, the college has had 3 restrictions in place. One is doctors cannot say anything contrary to the public health recommendations and orders, is the exact language regarding COVID-19. Second thing is they can't write medical exemptions for COVID-19 injections, except in very, very rare circumstances. So it's virtually a ban. And the third thing is they can't prescribe alternative medications for the prevention and treatment of COVID. Now, for doctors who don't follow those or don't conform to those restrictions, they have brought investigations and disciplinary actions, and that's what they have done with my clients. And they are now trying to take away their licenses, essentially. But they're doing this to dozens of other doctors in Ontario as well on the same basis. Now, the problem with that is that you have to actually believe that there's an act of professional misconduct before you can even start an investigation and begin after that to prosecute somebody. But you can't have a finding of professional misconduct based on somebody not following a recommendation. They actually have to be in conflict with one of the items listed as professional misconduct in a regulation which has 32 items, right? So this is the whole problem. This whole prosecutorial effort on the part of the college is based on nothing, recommendations, right? And yet, nobody has called them to account. So I brought a motion prior to the hearings, the discipline hearings that are going to be scheduled for Drs. Trozy, Phillips, and Luchku. And I said, hey, you can't have these hearings because, first of all, even if these restrictions are law, they violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but on jurisdictional grounds, you have no right to impose these as if they are actually laws and regulations. Right? And so we were heard on those issues, and we're awaiting the outcome.
What was your takeaway? The counsel for the college, the CPSO's counsel, argued obviously against what you were saying in the motion. What was your takeaway from the arguments that particular person made?
Well, the college does something really extraordinary because they've been battling me for 18 months on whether these restrictions are actually laws. And I'm saying, no, they're just recommendations. So I get their factum the weekend before the hearing. Oh, they're finally admitting that they're just recommendations. The reason they did that is they wanted to avoid the charter arguments. So if they admit these things aren't laws, then you can't apply the charter to them. So that was their first strategy. But then in their fact and in their oral submissions, they did not draw out the consequences of these things being merely recommendations. So that was one strategy, which I think was quite transparent. The second strategy was they talked about college policies. Now, the college can pass policies based on majority vote of the college council. And they too are recommendations. They're not laws or regulations. And she tried to take the law concerning policies, and there's some cases on what policies means, and merge that with these restrictions to try to muddy the waters on whether the restrictions were policies or something else. They're trying to move it towards the policy end of things, and then apply the cases to that. And so that was actually quite a sneaky strategy, and I tried to rebut that in my reply, and I hope that the panel understood what I was trying to get across. So my point in the submissions was that, in Dr. Lutchku's, Dr. Whitmore's Ontario, you can be, proved innocent, but you cannot escape prosecution. And the same with Dr. Trousi, the same thing. I mean, it is his duty to raise questions about COVID-19. They're trying to prosecute him for doing that. I'm saying he has been a university professor. His job is to raise questions, but not in Dr. Whitmore's Ontario. And then Dr. Phillips, well, he reported some vaccine adverse events through his ER practice, right? And he has a duty to do that as a physician, but not in Dr. Whitmore's Ontario. He's being accused of fraud now for doing that. And so Dr. Whitmore has had a very profound and negative influence on the practice of medicine in this province.
And just to give the viewer some context here, Dr. Whitmore is the current CEO and
Yeah, she's
registrar?
the CEO and registrar, and she is a member of College Council, and College Council elects her to be registrar and CEO, and she's now, I think, on her third appointment.
Wow. And now, where did this stranglehold that the CPSO has on medical practice in Ontario come from? I understand that this dates back decades even.
Yes, well, the Regulated Health Professions Act, which governs all healthcare practitioners in the province, it's a huge act, it's about 100 pages. It was passed in 1990, but since that time, there have been all kinds of problems with the college acting outside of the legislation and prosecuting doctors for all kinds of reasons that are not consistent with the legislation and the regulations. And there was a tremendously insightful report about this written by Michael Code, now Justice Michael Code of the Ontario Superior Court, or he might be on the Court of Appeal now. And he at that time was considered to be one of the leading, and was one of the leading criminal and constitutional lawyers in the country. They gave him 10 college cases that were very controversial and said, put fresh eyes on these, tell us what's wrong. And he found that every case was a violation of basic legal principles, and none of the doctors should have been prosecuted. And many of the problems that he points to in this report, which you can still get on the internet, it's called Medicine Needs Glasnost, all those problems still exist today. So we are now 22 years later, and we've still got the same problems. And one of the reasons that happens is that the doctors' insurance lawyers at the Canadian Medical Protective Association do not raise jurisdictional and charter questions with the college. They just accept the framework the college gives them for investigations and prosecutions. And so that means these really big problems that we talked about last Wednesday have never been addressed. And so we're doing this as a matter of first instance, hoping to fundamentally change the way doctors are regulated and the way patients receive medical care.
And I want to give the viewer some context here, because what you're referring to there is this CMPA. So the doctors essentially pay into a legal fund where they can seek representation, but never to challenge anything that may contradict or go against CPSO policy. Is that correct?
That's right. CMPA is the Canadian Medical Protective Association. So doctors have an arrangement. They pay into an insurance fund. They have trouble in terms of malpractice issues or with the college over professional misconduct and related matters. Then they just call up one of their insurance lawyers and they get representation. Right. But the doctors are not told that when it comes to the college, mostly they are not told that the CMPA has a policy limitation on what they will argue. And so I'm trying to wake up doctors to this fact as well, because the CMPA is not being honest with doctors and has led them down the garden path.
Mm-hmm. And so this case really is previously unheard of and precedent setting in that you're resisting what I already referred to as this stranglehold that the college has on private, personal, individualized medical care in Ontario. And so, of course, you're hoping to have a successful outcome here, but what does that look like, and what's kind of the time frame on something like this?
I'm hoping we will have a decision before December. If the decision goes in our favor, and we've challenged in part on the investigation orders themselves, which are written improperly and are not consistent with the standard of reasonable and probable grounds, which is the legal standard you have to meet to start an investigation under the legislation. So if we are successful on that, then every investigation that has been based upon this overbroad template will have to come to an end. It just won't be Dr. Trosi, Phillips, and Lechku. Dozens and dozens of doctors will be vindicated by this. And then there's even a larger picture here, which is that there may be doctors who have been investigated and prosecuted in similar ways and for other reasons. Their investigations and prosecutions would have to come to an end. Based on the legal principles that we have argued, because the college has been investigating outside the realm of its authority in all matters. So this could have a profound impact on existing investigations and prosecutions and future ones as well.
But you're essentially asking the college to squash its own investigation.
Right.
This isn't an independent legal review board, or there's no independent oversight here. So, just playing devil's advocate, what is the likelihood that they're going to rule against themselves?
Well, you see, there have been problems for many years because the College Council provides the members for all these different functions, for reviewing investigation orders, for looking at complaints, and for disciplining members. So you don't have a clear separation between investigation, prosecution, and discipline. So normally, the prosecution is separated from the court, so to speak, right? So there have been a lot of problems, accusations of bias, and I think that those accusations are well-founded. So they created this new independent discipline tribunal, and they hired some independent adjudicators, lawyers, and some people with experience in the Human Rights Tribunal, to mix in with the members on these hearing panels. So on Wednesday, we had 2 doctors from the council, 2 public members from the council, and 1 independent adjudicator. So they've mixed things up a little bit to try to give a veneer of independence to it. But the adjudicators are hired by the college, they're not appointed by the government. So that's very problematic right there. So yes, we're in a bit of a bind. I tried to present this in a way that would speak to the members such that they could make a very clear and limited decision if they wanted to, and not get into all the complications of the charter, because they really don't need to make the right decision. So literally the jury is out on that. I would say I'm cautiously pessimistic.
Right, that's fair. And I suppose, Dr. Trousey, just in closing here, whether the ruling goes in the favor of the motion or not, what does something like this mean for the medical landscape?
I think in this situation, what's happened is a lot of people, but certainly including doctors, have had to look at their bank statement and their career and their appointments and all the things they've worked for in their life. And they've had to look at their morals and the Hippocratic Oath and science on the other hand. And these two things shouldn't be in conflict, but they have been in conflict since early 2020. So there's the choice to be made. Now, I'm by no means alone. In this province, there are dozens, and that's not normal. There's dozens of doctors who are either suspended, under investigation, being persecuted in a variety of ways because they've chosen to follow the Hippocratic Oath, they've chosen to follow the law, and they've actually read the science. So they're not just parroting the agenda. So we've had to choose to give up these things to maintain this thing. I think that was a good choice. Many doctors have chosen this or been conditioned to do this because we know that the level of psychological operation of the last 2 years is profound. So for whatever reason, a lot of doctors have abandoned the Hippocratic Oath. They don't even know what's going on with a lot of the science we're discussing. We can go into that another time. Many laws about not doing this to human beings should not be processed like meat. So if this hearing decides to rule in this weaponization of what's supposed to be a regulatory body, which is being used to further an agenda, weaponized against the lawful positions of doctors doing our jobs. And of course, the number one victim is not the doctors, because for every doctor who is ethical and scientifically intact, who is sidelined from taking care of patients in this province, that's thousands of people who have no access to an ethical doctor who knows the science. They are therefore either just pay your taxes and stay out of the hospital, or go in there and be processed according to an agenda which has no scientific foundation and no ethical foundation. So if this goes the right way, that'll mean that there's some internal process to start correcting what I think very accurately regard as the criminal weaponization and abuse of power that's happening at the CPSO. So that would mean the college could be corrected. Some of those people could face the consequences of the unlawful activities. It would also mean that the dozens of doctors in Ontario who held our ground and are still real doctors would be able to provide real health care and hopefully provide direction. I know the dozens of doctors. I know the hundreds of doctors in the country. I know the thousands of doctors and scientists in the world. And believe me, we didn't come this far to just suddenly submit to a criminal campaign. Either way, we move ahead. And either way, we continue to hope for the return of the rule of law to our country and the rule and human rights. You have a right to see a doctor who has not only a right, but has a duty to make their judgment. They need to read the studies. They need to look at what's in the little bottles. And then they need to tell you the truth based on their judgment. The Hippocratic Oath does not allow a doctor to defer to someone else's judgment. I can't say, well, I've got a zipper on my mouth because I've been told I have to say what Public Health Canada says, right? That's not the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is I have to tell you what's my best judgment because you came to me. We have patient-doctor relationship is a sacred thing, and they violated this. So one way or another, we're going to persist. Are the good guys going to win?
Help keep our independent investigative journalism afloat by contributing whatever you're able to at rebelinvestigates.com. While you're there, you can catch up on other exclusive reports. That website again is rebelinvestigates.com. Thank you for your support.